Hello everyone. Today we will be understanding India's economic diplomacy. Let's begin. Introduction. India, with its rising economic prowess, is emerging as a global leader in the world order, which is being reshaped by a multitude of shocks like increasing polarization, geopolitical tensions, and economic slowdown. So, what are the multiple shocks? Increasing polarization, geopolitical tensions, and economic slowdown. However, converting these challenges into opportunities so as to meet India's international aspirations demands recalibration of its economic diplomacy program. This calls for a need to understand what is economic diplomacy and why is it important? What are the key instruments of economic diplomacy and what is their relevance? How successful has India been in using the key instruments of economic diplomacy in pursuing its global aspirations? What are the focus regions for India's economic diplomacy and why are they important? What are the key challenges in pursuing India's economic diplomacy and how India's economic diplomacy could be improved to enable it to achieve India's national interest? So, these are the questions we'll be addressing today. Moving on, what is economic diplomacy and why is it important? Economic diplomacy, first of all, is a foreign policy tool, and is broadly defined as the aspect of diplomacy that focuses on international economic relations. It is therefore an art of serving economic, political, and strategic interests of the country by the use of economic instruments in conduct of international relations. It is designed to influence policy and regulatory decisions of foreign governments as well as those of international organizations. Economic diplomacy is necessarily performed by the official representatives of the state, but with the changing scenario today, private sector has an important role to play and function to perform in its successful implementation. So what are the objectives of economic diplomacy? First is protecting the country as a major economic power, securing favorable multilateral trade negotiations. Today is the world of bilateral trade negotiations, as you might be noticing. So, yeah, access to foreign resources and promotion of foreign investment in the country, promotion of exports as and businesses abroad, realization of political objectives through economic actions. Okay. What are the key instruments of economic diplomacy and what is their relevance? The key instruments. First of all, is attracting investments and promotion of exports. That is the major attracting investments. It helps a country becoming an economic power, which in turn gives strong voice to the country in global politics. Wealth creation by the USA by attracting foreign firms' investments is a noted example of this. Similarly, adoption of economic reforms by China in the late 1970s helped China becoming a major global economic power. What China did was started attracting foreign investments and foreign branches of different companies, MNCs, that led to its rapid growth. Food for thought. For decades, the US was the main destination for foreign firms' investment. Some of the firms' investment, some of the reasons for the attractiveness of the United States for foreign investment include best regulatory performance in paying taxes, a large wealthy consumer market, culture of diversity and innovation, access to deep capital markets and world's top talents. Adoption of economic reforms by China in the late 1970s helped China becoming a major global economic power. These reforms included encouraging the formation of rural enterprises and private businesses, liberalizing foreign trade and investment, relaxing state control over some prices, investing in rising industries like solar panel. Okay, so this is how US and China became the strongest foreign destination in their times. Now it's India's turn. Okay. Mobilizing finances for partner countries. Financial assistance to partner countries help the mobilizing finances for partner countries. Financial assistance to partner countries helps the country bolster its image as a credible development partner, besides aiding the creation of political influence and constituencies. For example, China's growing international clout has been credited for such financial assistance to neighboring countries like Pakistan and Nepal for developmental projects. Okay, so we all know China's growing interest in Pakistan and Nepal, and it has started providing huge amount of aid to them. It's all a part of mobilizing finances to create political influence in constituencies. Food for thought. Financial support for partner countries is provided in different ways. Okay. Sovereign. For example, Japan International Cooperation Agency is a governmental agency that delivers the official development assistance for the government of Japan. Multilateral. For example, the Asian Development Bank was established as a regional financial institution focusing primarily on the development of Asia Pacific region. Second, building support to set and enforce international rules. Ability to set and enforce rules for multilateral organizations acts as a leverage to shape the international order for meeting the interest of one's own country. For example, the existing international order embodied in a network of international organizations like WTO, UNSC has been mostly shaped by developed countries like US, UK, Russia, and thus are favorable to them. Okay. So if you want to enforce and shape the international order, you try to influence the international organizations, which can only happen in its formation years. Now, economic sanctions. Economic sanctions are defined as the withdrawal of customary trade and financial relations for foreign and security policy purposes, including counterterrorism, non proliferation, democracy, and human rights promotion, conflict resolution, etc. It is used to elicit favorable policy response from a country with which otherwise the political terms are not good. Sanctions have been the defining feature of the Western response led by US to several geopolitical challenges, including the nuclear program of Iran and North Korea and Russia's intervention in Ukraine. Economic sanction is a, you can say, an effective tool in which they try to control the decisions of other countries. And what entails in an economic sanction is that they threaten that they'll stop trade with you, they'll stop supplying you with essential goods they might be exporting to you. That's how they control the geopolitical challenges. Food for thought. With the shift of economic power from west to east, experts suggest that absolute and frequent actions by the West may put the financial leverage of these countries at a risk in the long run. As a result, these countries now resort to selective sanctions. Recent US sanctions against Russia is one example. The US imports approximately 96% of the country's potassium fertilizer from Russia and relies on Russia and its allies Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan for roughly half the uranium powering its nuclear plants. Imports of neither the potassium fertilizer nor the uranium is on the sanction list. Also, ban on Russia's crude oil and gas accounts for only 8% of US imports. So we can see how economic sanctions are kind of, they are doing it in their own favor, and they are pressurizing other countries to do while they are not doing it completely themselves. Like you might have heard that the West were putting allegations on India for buying cheap oil from Russia, while they themselves were not putting sanctions on Russia. We can see US imports approximately 96% of country's potassium fertilizer from Russia. So they are not putting sanction on potassium, but they expect India to do the same. That if you are importing anything from Russia, put a ban on it to end Russia-Ukraine war. But they themselves are not doing the same. So our international policy of India is India first. Our interests are put on a higher pedestal than getting involved in others' cabals. So this is a very good example to quote that US imports 96% of its potassium needs from Russia. It was not banned. Then second one, it imports half of its uranium needs from Kazakhstan, half of its uranium needs from Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan for its nuclear plants, also not banned. But what is banned and which they think will have an effect but doesn't have an effect is they banned Russia's crude oil. That's what they expected India to do. While we are heavily dependent on Russia for crude oil, Russia and UAE, they are only importing 8% of their crude oil from Russia, which they depend only for 8% of its need. So that's what West do. They prioritize their own interest while putting pressure on us, the developing countries, to do something which they themselves are not doing. That's the partiality they partake in. Now, how successful has India been in using the key instruments of economic diplomacy in pursuing its global aspirations? Okay. Attracting investments and promotion of exports. India has taken various initiatives to increase its economy's competitiveness on a global scale. These include attracting investment in domestic markets by liberalizing norms for foreign direct investments, providing ease of doing business in India, production linked initiatives in various sectors, and Make in India initiative, Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan, etc. So, what are the initiatives? India's initiatives. We can write it here. We have FDI, foreign direct investment, ease of doing business, production linked initiatives, PLIs in various sector, Make in India, Atmanirbhar Bharat, etc. As a result of the above steps, FDI inflow in India was its highest ever at USD 81.97 billion in 2020-21. It's a very good point. India's FDI inflow highest in 2020-21. It was the COVID time, yet we had the highest FDI inflow. That's a huge deal. At USD 81.97 billion. Okay. Then, increasing the overseas direct investments by Indian corporates by removing the cap on raising funding through pledges of shares, local assets, and foreign assets. Then, let's look at this Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan, a step towards creating Brand India, Brand India. The campaign was launched in 2020 to promote Indian goods in the global supply chain markets and help the country achieve self reliance. The government took several bold reforms, such as supply chain reforms for agriculture, rational tax systems, simple and clear laws, capable human resource, and strong financial system. A self reliant India with five pillars: economy, quantum jumps, not incremental changes. Okay. Infrastructure represents modern India. Systems, technology driven systems. Demography, vibrant demography of the largest democracy. Demand, full utilization of the power and of demand and supply. Key achievements of Atmanirbhar Bharat: reduced dependence on imports of products like air conditioners, self sufficiency in indigenous personal protective equipments, PPE kits. India exported 65.5 million indigenous COVID-19 vaccines to 90 plus countries. India's merchandise exports have crossed for $400 billion for the first time. So, key achievements, you can say it's Atma Nirbhar Bharat's achievement. Let's write them down. Air conditioners, reduced dependence reduced dependence, then self sufficiency in PPE kits, self sufficiency. We are just writing it so that we remember while quoting examples. Then India exported 65 million COVID-19 vaccines to 90 countries. That's a huge deal. Then our merchandise exports crossed $400 billion for the first time. So these are the key achievements. Okay, moving on. Mobilizing financial assistance for partner countries, India, since its independence, has been a torchbearer of global South South cooperation. This support is extended through multilateral platforms as well as bilateral development aid. Financing through multilateral platforms. India UN Development Fund. The $150 million fund was established in 2017 by India to work with developing countries in critical areas such as climate resilience, financial sustainability, gender equality, renewable energy, etc. International Solar Alliance, the ISA, aims to pave the way for future solar generation, storage, and technologies for member countries' need by mobilizing over 1,000 billion by 2030. Wow. The ISA aims to pave the way for future solar generation, storage, and technologies for member countries' need by mobilizing over $1,000 billion by 2030. It is a huge deal. Then United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change UNFCCC. India has played a key role in advocating for the Loss and Damage Fund at COP27. COP27. The fund is meant to finance infrastructure rebuilding and economic recovery in developing countries facing huge losses due to climate change and induced disasters. Okay, so what we have done, we have advocated. Let me write this. It it's also a very good initiative, and we must remember it to quote whenever the need might be. Or let me write it down here only. I'll just write it here. Loss and damage fund. Keyword is India plus COP27. It's a huge deal. Okay. Bilateral development aid. India provides aid to partner countries through various modalities since independence. With its economic rise, the development aid has also seen a commensurate increase. This in turn has increased India's bilateral visibility and capabilities and also helped India shed the tag of being an aid recipient that was common in 1950s and 1960s. So are we were tagged as an aid recipient in 1950s and 1960s, but now we have also seen a huge rise in the development aid that we are providing for various developing countries. So our image have has changed dramatically over the past few years. Between 2008 and 2020, India disbursed approximately 8.35 billion US dollars as grants and loans under various development compacts. Extremely good point. 2008 to 2020, India gave US dollar 8.35 billion as grants and loans. Then furthermore, the concessional loans or lines of credit LOCs has more than doubled in the last 5 years from $11 billion to around $30 billion. Grants and loans, okay. These are concessional loans, okay. LOCs or lines of credit are extended to foreign governments at a concessional rates from money borrowed at market rates by India's Exim Bank, Export Import Bank from the international market. Okay. So, which is the agency which gives concessional loans? It's the Exim Bank. LOCs are dispersed by Exim Banks. Key, excuse me. Key modalities of India's development assistance: capacity building and training provided by Indian Technical and Economic Cooperation within the Development Partnership Administration (DPA) in the Ministry of External Affairs. Okay. Lines of credit of concessional loans managed by Exim Bank of India with the Ministry of Finance as the coordinating institution. Coordinating institution is Ministry of Finance and not Ministry of External Affairs. This might be asked. Grant assistance managed by DPA within MEA, Ministry of External Affairs. DPA also coordinates all other assistance related to loans, bilateral trade and investment, duty free or quota free access to Indian market. Okay. So, the ongoing projects aided by India. Bangladesh is the top recipient of India's development assistance, which is currently extends to 63 countries, most of them in Africa and Asia. Okay. So Bangladesh is the top recipient of India's development assistance. Uh, Bangladesh, top recipient of India's assistance. Bangladesh, then Nepal, then Myanmar. Some of the projects undertaken in Africa are sanitation, drinking water, construction of hydropower projects, solar electrification, information technology, and agricultural projects. Key reasons for steep rise in developmental aid: to position India as a leading power, greater availability of disposable resources due to growing size of economy. Okay, this is a good point because we often ask ourselves, why is India trying to help others when we think that we don't have enough for us? But we must understand that there are resources which we have abundance of. So availability of disposable resources is one of the key factors. And also we want to be a leading power to cap the increasing penetration of China in areas and regions seen as India's traditional strongholds. Okay, now mobilizing support for rulemaking. India at present has emerged as a leader for South South cooperation and for many decades has been assuming the role of leadership for coalition building among like minded developing countries to protect the shared interest on trade, climate change, and developmental policy. Some of the examples are as follows: drafting sustainable developmental goals. India was elected to serve on the open working group for drafting the agenda. It adopted a leadership role of the G77 bloc of 134 developing countries, and its views are clearly reflected in the outcome document, which incorporated provisions like creation of specific indicators and national reviews on the progress on achieving the SDGs, peace and stability in the context of the developmental agenda to be looked at from a developmental lens and not from a political one. World Trade Organization (WTO). India has played a key role in various important yet contentious issues. For example, India assumed the leadership role in the inception of peace clause on public stock holding in the Bali Ministerial Conference in 2013, and India, along with South Africa, successfully secured waiving the IPR provisions for COVID-19 vaccines so that the vaccines are accessible to poor countries. Now, what is India's stand on key friction areas in WTO? Nature of decision making. Ensure that the multilateral rule making processes are neither bypassed nor diluted, and consensus based decision making remains intact. Then, relevance of special and differential treatment provision. Gaps between the developing and developed members have widened in many areas, hence, S&D provisions are non-negotiable and must continue. Revival of dispute settlement system. India has strongly demanded for the resolution of the impasse at the appellate body while also calling for prohibiting unilateral trade measures. Process of reforms. Principles of non discrimination, predictability, transparency, and the tradition of decision making by consensus need to remain sacrosanct. Okay. World Health Organization. Amidst the COVID-19 pandemic that has put a sharp focus on the functioning of WHO, India proposed a 9 point reform agenda to the UN under the approach on WHO reforms related to issues like funding mechanisms, criteria to declare public health emergency of international concern, etc. Reform in UNSC. India, along with other G4 members, that is Germany, Japan, and Brazil, have proposed several changes in the Council to reflect current geopolitical realities and make the organization more representative, legitimate, efficient, and transparent. These proposals include expansion of permanent and non permanent membership to the UNSC, reform in the body's working methods, and better representation of developing country aspirations, including African countries and small island developing states. Then demand for equity at UNFCCC. India has been a central player in climate negotiations. It has been voicing for the principles of equity and common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities. Okay. At COP26, India made a strong call for climate justice for climate change, stemming from the assertion that the idea of zero emission by 2050 being used by the developed countries ignores their responsibility and transfers its burden to developing countries. So, what India has been calling out at COP26, India made a strong call for, we must remember this keyword, climate justice for climate change. Climate justice for climate change. Okay. The mantra of lifestyle for environment to combat climate change was also shared to make it a mass movement of environment conscious lifestyles. Okay. Economic sanctions. India complies with sanctions by UN but resorts to unilateral sanctions and trade restrictions against other countries rarely. For example, it sanctioned South Africa's apartheid regime and blocked trade with Fiji from 1989 to 1999 over the discrimination of Indians there. More recently, it revoked India's most favored nation status in 2019 after a terrorist attack in Kashmir and banned over 100 Chinese developed apps in 2021 following border clashes. However, India does not have an autonomous or unilateral sanctions program. At the same time, India has also been a reluctant in complying with unilateral economic sanction by other countries to uphold its strategic autonomy. For instance, it has secured waivers to US sanctions on Iran for the Chahabar port in view of its strategic importance in transporting cargo and humanitarian aid to Afghanistan. It has also successfully secured a waiver against sanctions by the US through CAATSA over its purchases of S-400 missile defense system from Russia, India's time-tested friend. Also, India has avoided imposing sanctions against Russia and continued to purchase oil in spite of pressure from G7 nations in the backdrop of India-Russia-Ukraine war. In sum, India has pursued its economic diplomacy as per its own national interests and global aspirations. Over the decade, it has been evolved so as to fulfill the demands of the time. Evolving dynamics of India's economic diplomacy. During 1950-1970s, Indian economic diplomacy focused on securing and providing overseas development assistance to countries in Africa and Asia. That meant economy was largely based on import substitution and license raj. Then in 1980s, we opened up our economy for the world with focus on IT sector, enhanced India's footprint in global economy, economic reforms were introduced. Then in 1990s, India joined WTO and started voicing for interest of developing countries, increased the ODA substantially, LPG reforms were introduced. Then in 2010s, India launched the second phase of Line of Credit (LOC) for funding critical projects in partner countries, began greater diaspora engagement, and subnational economic diplomacy demand for reforms of WTO. Economy grew strong and resilient. And in 2020s, we have actively engaged in pursuing market access and contesting non-tariff barriers, ensuring energy security, and also leveraging medical diplomacy, enhancing ODAs. Strive for Atmanirbhar Bharat. So earlier, economic diplomacy was primarily focused on assistance and cooperation. Now, India has started signaling its intent to be involved in defining the new rules of the game. Moving on. focused regions for India's economic diplomacy in the present era. In the current global order with changing geopolitical realities, certain regions of the world are providing significant prospects and opportunities for India to rise and emerge as a global economic player. First of all, we will see Africa. Africa is a huge continent sourcing critical minerals like lithium, graphite, etc., which are essential for building the global green economy, then countering China's monopoly in rare earth metals and maritime security in Indian Ocean region, investment opportunities due to growing middle class. So that's why Africa is important. Then Gulf region. This green part is the Gulf region. India's over 50% of oil needs are being met by GCC countries. Energy and renewables, water conservation, food security, digitization are the emerging areas of cooperation. Then Indo-Pacific. Indo-Pacific accounts for 62%. This is whole is Indo-Pacific. Accounts for 62% of the global GDP, with more than 50% of global trade traversing through its waters. Strategic competition over the next several decades will be dominated by the maritime and blue economy. Then Central Asia. All the countries are rich in minerals like uranium, gold, gas, etc., and well endowed with hydroelectric resources necessary for regional peace and countering China. Then Indian Ocean region (IOR). 95% of India's trade by volume and 68% of its trade by value comes via the Indian Ocean, a valuable source of mineral and fishing resources. Then European Union. EU sees India as the strongest alternative to China for protecting its interest in the IOR, civil nuclear cooperation, 5G, AI, education, and climate changes are the emerging areas of cooperation. Post-Brexit opportunities to resolve the differences over broad-based trade and investment agreement (BTIA). So, what are the key challenges in pursuing India's economic diplomacy? First is India's inability to gather majority support at multilateral platforms. For example, at WTO, India has not been able to gather enough support for permanent solution for public stockholding of food grains. Similarly, despite India's demand to review the WTO moratorium on custom duties on electronic transmissions, online deliveries of digitizable products, example music, ebooks, film, softwares, etc., was extended further. Such moratorium results in loss of around $10 billion per annum globally, 95% of which is borne by the developing countries. Lacks a clear strategy for development cooperation. India is not actively pursuing any specific developmental goals such as food security, health security, clean energy, or education for all. Hence, there is no synchronization between different development instruments and their impacts remain invisible. LOCs are typically used by recipient countries to fund small development projects such as roads, bridges, railway lines, power transmission, and water supply systems. Poor implementation of developmental projects. Implementation has been a key constraint for India's LOCs with poor disbursal rates and project completion record. Regional discrimination aid. Most of the aid by India goes to its neighboring countries. Therefore, other parts of the world like Africa often gets neglected. Scarcity of resources, ensuring security in IOR, and curbing dominance of China in IOR are the key reasons for such discrimination. Compartmentalized bureaucratic structure. Huge coordination and communication gaps persist with different ministries. Also, there is a lack of adequate engagement between government and businesses, and capacity constraint persist. This affects integration of economic and strategic goals. Declining share of merchandise in global value chain (GVC). Although India's overall exports have been rising, there has been a steady decline in merchandise export, a labor intensive sector, growth after 2011. Despite being in proximity of Factor Asia, India is less linked with GVCs than other countries like Bangladesh, Vietnam, etc., due to factors like stagnant growth and financial constraints in the manufacturing sector, high logistic costs that continue to be triple that of China and double that of Bangladesh. Oh my god. And then lower ability to attract FDI, falling export competitiveness in labor intensive sectors like textiles and clothing, gems and jewelry, and leather products. Balancing with China. Bridging the gap between aspiration and rationality. What are the challenges in complete decoupling from China? China's presence in RCP that has been pledged to create more resilient. China's success in establishing regional economic institutions like AIIB and NDB. India's dependence for pharmaceuticals, ingredients, automobiles, and digital sector from China. China European Union agreement on investments enhances importance of China. Many leading Indian companies with a presence in China may face adverse impact. Complete disengagement may push up the price of investments and hurt the Indian economy. China, despite a bilateral restriction, could access Indian markets through multilateral institutions. Huge investment by Chinese company in Indian enterprises like Paytm. Okay. Engaging with China. Competition from China in South Asian region, its economic dominance, border frictions, countering China's presence in the Indo-Pacific to safeguard energy and resource corridors are key areas of emerging concerns for India. Experts believe that India's complete economic decoupling from China is unrealistic because we are quite interlinked, and the challenge is to find a perfect balance in dealing with China. Emerging issues: protectionism. The gains of globalization, which ensured the free movement of people, goods, services, and capital, brought the world closer, is being questioned due to rising inequality. These have also fueled the debates on decoupling, economic sovereignty, and self reliance, preference to bilateral agreements to multilateral rules, and also anti immigration sentiment. Weakening multilateral institutions as the developed countries like US and UK, the founders of the liberal multilateral system, have tended to withdraw the support from multilateral institutions. For example, appellate body of WTO is non-functional due to the obstruction of appointment of new members to it by the USA. Humanitarian crisis. The pandemic has reversed decades of progress on sustainable developmental goals with collateral damage to education, health, and nutrition. The ultimate test of India's diplomacy now is about how it would improve the standards of living in its partner countries. Emerging technologies. The fourth industrial revolution is emerging as the backbone of economic growth, which necessitates that India must retool some of its own economic diplomacy. Now, experts suggest a recalibration of engagement with China or to constrain negative strategic fallouts without bucking the trends of China's economic trajectory through negotiating a level playing field in trade, investments, and services in China, finding alternative partners in the field of artificial intelligence, 5G, and digital technologies, recent reinvigoration of ties with Taiwan for supply of semiconductors is a good example. Okay, if an example is there, we must remember it. Taiwan for supply of semiconductors. Then redefine agendas of multilateral institutions to shift focus from tariffs, rules of origin and trade deficits to quality standards, anti-corruption norms and green requirements in contracts. Find common points of interest in collaboration with each country and address the economic dependencies of China independently, doing away with the compartmentalizing the political and economic ties as suggested by the Ministry of External Affairs in 2003. Then Supply Chain Resilience Initiative launched in 2021 by India, Japan, Australia must provide effective alternative to China in the time-bound manner. Okay. In conversation, why Made in India is not as popular as Made in China. Okay, so let's see. Um, Because India has already captured the Indian market of mass consumption goods, India still struggles to manufacture products as interesting and as affordable as Chinese products. How did China achieve this feat? China enjoys the advantage of early entry in global economy as manufacturing factory. It initiated the economic reforms and trade liberalization way back in 1970s. This resulted in mass-scale production at affordable prices along with customization to meet the demands of the different countries. China made Barbie dolls have different looks in India and Japan. Okay. So, why did India lag behind? India had its own developmental priorities after independence. Economic reforms in India began in 1990s, but it was gradual, unlike China. As a result, India could not become a part of global value chains. However, India definitely excelled in export of IT service and automobiles. For example, tractors of Mahindra are very popular among US tractors farmers. But this approach has reduced India's visibility in global manufacturing sector. These companies have their own niche and their products do not serve the masses. But I believe Make in India and Atmanirbhar Bharat campaign will certainly give a push to mass manufacturing in India and will promote brand India across the world. Okay. How could India's economic diplomacy be revamped to enable it to achieve its national objectives as well as global aspirations? Domestic reforms. Economic diplomacy and domestic reforms are intricately linked. How India chooses to engage with the world will primarily depend on its ability to build a new narrative around its strengths and offerings, its capacity to build new engines of growth and productivity like its pharmaceuticals, automotive, and telecom sectors, its drive to prosper and grow and look out for the world, its commitment and ability to engage at granular and macro levels. Device and economic diplomacy policy. India enjoys good ties with its development cooperation partners. To leverage this strength, India must outline a long term economic diplomacy policy that aims to stabilize relations with neighboring countries, respond to China's belligerence in the Indo Pacific, promote linkages to the Eurasian continent, enhance cooperation with major rising economies, defend and develop Indian strategic interests on both land and water. Improving aid program. Unlike China and the West, India does not have substantial resources to support partner countries. Therefore, it should prepare a focused country-wise strategy and identify a few areas like health security, climate change adaptation, and gender equality, etc. for closer cooperation. Establish International Development Cooperation Agency for deeper and more effective engagement and address the rapidly evolving competitive development financing landscape, support private sector investment to complement the sovereign development fund and to provide greater flexibility and bandwidth. Greater collaboration among stakeholders like Indian civil society organizations, Indian diaspora, NGOs to supplement developmental projects in partner countries at low costs. For example, Pratham and Barefoot College are playing an important role in Africa. Then climbing up the GVC export ladder. Targeted sector policies are needed to ensure firms are gainfully linking into GVCs. Also, effective implementation of National Master Plan under PM Gati Shakti for multimodal connectivity and National Infrastructure Pipeline NIP is needed as they would facilitate the ease of doing business, improve trade logistics, and address infrastructural challenges, last mile connectivity to expand GVC linkages. Then there's a food for thought. Annual Status of Education Report, ASER surveys of Pratham as a citizen led survey to assess learning outcomes of children across rural. Organizations from various countries in Latin America, Africa, and Asia are designing and implementing ASER through People's Action for Learning PAL network. India's Barefoot College International Forge is the first of its kind women centered global network dedicated to sustainable development of marginalized rural communities in over 90 countries. Each center offers illiterate and semi literate women locally relevant training opportunities that center around self advocacy and resilience. Okay, both are very nice examples. Then, emerging opportunities, health diplomacy. International Yoga Day and establishment of WHO Global Center for Traditional Medicine in Jamnagar, Gujarat are the bright spots to enable India to make a coalition of like-minded constituents for negotiations at the WHO. However, the outcomes of global health strategies are tied to the national context. Therefore, to demonstrate the leadership in global health diplomacy, India must bolster its own public health system. Domain experts for digital sector. Tech expert Nandan Nilekani was made the chairman of Unique Identification Authority of India for implementation of Aadhaar successfully. This model of attracting experts must be replicated in negotiations at multilateral institutions on issues like cybersecurity, data privacy, etc. Many-lateral organizations, India should also consider playing a proactive leadership role in many-lateral organizations such as Bay of Bengal Initiative for Multi-Sectoral Technical and Economic Cooperation (BIMSTEC) and the Mekong-Ganga Cooperation (MGC) to build support at multilateral platforms like WTO and UNGC. Dedicated Ministry for Blue Economy. This will put all the components of a blue economy, including security, maritime budgetary allocation, naval acquisitions, maritime trade, energy needs, etc., etc., under a single body, resulting in improved policy making and execution. Promoting Brand India. India must bring a core offering that encapsulates exactly what makes Brand India unique. So, what makes Brand India unique? Sustainable development solutions, low cost renewable energy opportunities, human resource for leading fourth industrial revolution, India's soft power, diversity and democracy, vaccines and affordable medicines, services as a global public good. Okay. Flexibilities in policymaking. Economic diplomacy in India today's world entails adjustment of policy in the interest of augmenting advantages to the country. For example, high tariffs faced by India's apparel industry in key markets such as EU and UK as compared to zero duty access given to competing nations like Bangladesh and Cambodia are adversely affecting India's exports performance. Such a trade barrier could be overcome by establishing factories in countries that have FTA in these lucrative markets. Thus, when it comes to export promotion, Make in India should also incorporate Make with India. A strong, extremely strong point is this: Make in India should incorporate Make with India. Okay, so we are going to conclude. India's economic diplomacy since independence has largely been guided by the international cooperation and solidarity with existing associations and partnerships, despite an unusual blend of altruism and pragmatism. The new normal economic diplomacy should seek for balance between competition and cooperation, aspirations and the achievable, regional and global. It should be navigated on the strong foundation of rules based collaboration. Also, India's concerted actions at home will determine its evolution as a key player on the global platform. Hence, we have completed economic diplomacy of India. Thank you so much for staying with us. See you next time.